The newly commissioned Squadron 15, the first American PT squadron, was earmarked for the European theatre, but initially they braced for the vast expanse of the Pacific, with orders directing them to the Hawaiian Sea frontier. The war, a relentless sculptor of destinies, had other plans. Strategic shifts, driven by the critical needs of the European conflict, dramatically rerouted their journey. Pacific preparations were abruptly abandoned, replaced by an uncertain transit across the Atlantic for Lend-Lease transfer. Ultimately, their bows pointed towards the sun-drenched, war-torn shores of the Mediterranean. For Lieutenant Commander Stanley M. Barnes, the squadron's commander, this redirection was a call to action. He was determined his men would see combat, not languish in a training assignment. Barnes bypassed standard channels. He made a bold, independent trip to Algiers. His mission to seek out Vice Admiral Henry K. Hewitt to secure active duty for Squadron 15. Hewitt, to Barnes's surprise, delivered news both immediate and exhilarating. The boats were already at Bone, the most advanced Allied port in North Africa. Squadron 15, without a moment's delay, found itself plunged directly into the crucible of the North African conflict, poised at the very forefront of the Allied advance. By early May 1943, Squadron 15 was operational, their sleek hulls slicing through the Mediterranean waters. On the night of May 8th into the 9th, Barnes led PT-206 and PT-207, alongside Lieutenant Reed's division, on their inaugural patrol off Cape Bon. The sea air was thick with tension as they coordinated with British MTB 260 commanded by Lieutenant Dennis Germain, Royal Navy. Their target, a German tanker, Barnes's PT-206, fired its first torpedo, a streak of white in the darkness, striking the tanker forward. The result was instantaneous and spectacular. An explosion, just like the movies, Barnes later recounted, sending debris scattering across the water. In the ensuing chaos, the dangers of combat were compounded by confusion. Germain's MTB accidentally launched 2 torpedoes at Barnes's boat, one passing under the bow, the other under the stern. Later, Germain's MTB ran aground, caught fire, and came under relentless assault from a circling Hinkle 111, despite the dual threat of enemy rifle fire from a German fortress at Calibia Roads and a persistent Heinkel PT-203 under the heroic command of Lieutenant Edwin A. Dubose bravely maneuvered through the maelstrom. To rescue Germain's entire crew, it was a baptism of fire, a brutal, invaluable lesson in real-world combat. As the North African campaign drew to a close, Squadron 15 established its primary base, PT Base 12, at Karouba near Bizerte, Tunisia, in late May. The site, a former seaplane facility, scarred by Allied bombings and Italian demolitions, presented immense logistical challenges. Barnes and his crews faced a Herculean task, clearing a harbour entrance, choked with sunken wrecks, and improvising a marine railway from salvaged seaplane dollies to service their boats. Yet, amidst the rubble and the relentless work, a crucial technological upgrade began. The gradual installation of radar on the boats at Base 12, an innovation that would prove vital for future operations. Preparations for the Sicilian invasion, Operation Husky, soon intensified. PT boats were thrust into a crucial role. On June 9th into the 10th, Barnes boldly led PTs into Palermo Harbour, where the large shore guns could not depress enough to engage them. Following the swift capture of Pantelleria, on June 11th, Lieutenant Mutti undertook a daring 505-mile round trip, on June 30th, leading an OSS mission to Sardinia. Then came the crossing to Sicily. On July 9th, the PTs departed Bizerte, enduring a wet and miserable trip through 12 to 16-foot seas, their decks laden with extra fuel in rubber tanks and drums. 3 nights later, on July 12th, into the 13th, Lieutenant O'Brien's and Lieutenant Clifford's PT divisions, alongside British Mountie B/MEG-Ds, executed a critical diversionary operation. They roared parallel to the beach, laying thick smoke and firing all guns, creating a convincing illusion of an imminent Allied landing. Shore batteries, guided by radar, unleashed heavy and accurate fire, confirming the success of the deception. In the chaotic darkness, British destroyers, mistaking PT flares for enemy tracer fire, mistakenly engaged both PTs and German E-boats. leading to near collisions and terrifying friendly fire. After the invasion, Admiral Hewitt ordered PTs to target enemy surface units, reinforcing Sicily. Palermo fell on July 23rd. Barnes led 8 boats there from Bizerte. A day later, off Ustica, PTs intercepted and captured the staff of the Italian admiral at Trapani, who had abandoned their superior along with a surprising crate of 1,000 lira notes. In Palermo, the harbour remained jammed with wrecks, but the PTs successfully located and sank the 8,800-ton Italian merchant ship Viminale and its tug, both already smoking and dead in the water. The enemy, adapting to the PT's relentless presence, shifted tactics. Operating primarily within the confines of the Strait of Messina, the PTs quickly adapted in turn, engaging German F-lighters and Italian MAS boats. On the night of July 26th into the 27th, Lieutenant Muti's division encountered 7 heavily armed German F-lighters, formidable 170-foot vessels with well-compartmented hulls that rendered them impervious to PT gunfire. The brutal engagement underscored the critical need for torpedoes against such robust targets. Tragically, Seaman Second Class Louis J. Bendel, a volunteer, was mortally wounded in the throat during this action. A stark reminder of the human cost. The following nights brought more intense clashes. Lieutenant Arbuckle's division attacked Italian AS boats, and Lieutenant O'Brien's division engaged both F-lighters and AS boats. PT-218 was repeatedly hit by 20mm fire, suffering significant damage, including a holing below the waterline, punctured gas tanks, and a disabled engine. Despite being painfully wounded in the heel, Lieutenant Arbuckle, along with other wounded officers, bravely organized the crew to save the heavily damaged boat, which was rapidly flooding and losing gasoline. These intense engagements proved decisive. As Barnes observed, the enemy finally got the idea that we weren't going to let them make that northern run anymore. Squadron 15's initial deployment and combat baptism in the Mediterranean was marked by rapid adaptation to diverse combat scenarios, evolving tactics and a crucial role in Allied campaigns from North Africa to Sicily. It demonstrated American naval capability and refined PT boat warfare far beyond the coastal defense role many had initially envisioned. Despite their initial Pacific orders, this first American PT squadron in the European theatre proved its mettle in deep penetration, missions, and large-scale invasions, effectively debunking the myth of their limited utility. As the Allied advance pressed northward through Italy, the PT boats found themselves adapting to an ever-evolving theatre of war, where their missions became as diverse as they were dangerous. Beyond the torpedo runs and gun battles, a new clandestine role emerged, the high-stakes world of special operations. The success of Operation MacGregor, which had subtly nudged the Italian Navy towards surrender, underscored the PT boat's unique utility for covert intelligence gathering and agent insertions. But the Mediterranean wasn't the only stage for such silent, perilous work. In the English Channel, far from the sun-baked Italian coast, PT-71 undertook a mission on the night of May 19th into the 20th, 1944. A mission that epitomized the nerve required for these operations. Anchored within 500 yards of German-held beaches, the crew worked in absolute silence. The only sounds the lapping of water against the hull and the distant murmur of the enemy coast. Every man was acutely aware that a single cough, a dropped tool, or a misplaced beam of light could betray their presence. Under the cover of the darkest night, rubber boats were lowered, and OSS agents, their faces grim with resolve, slipped into the frigid water. These were missions of surgical precision and immense risk, demanding not only flawless navigation through mine-laden waters, but also the steely discipline of crews, who knew they were often just a stone's throw from discovery. Their very presence, a whisper in the enemy's ear. In Italy, the eastward push of Patton's army, following the hard-won Sicilian campaign, demanded continuous PT boat support for coastal landings and crucial convoy screening. But these engagements often highlighted the stark limitations of the boat's primary weapon. The Mark 8 torpedoes, a relic from the 1920s, were notoriously unreliable. They porpoised, ran erratically, or simply passed harmlessly beneath the shallow draft F-lighters. That formed the backbone of German coastal transport. This infuriating inadequacy forced crews to abandon frontal assaults and develop ingenious sneak techniques, using their radar to guide them silently into firing positions before detection, hoping for a lucky hit that their torpedoes often failed to deliver. The frustration was palpable, a constant battle against both the enemy and their own outdated weaponry. The PT boats, however, also demonstrated a capacity for rapid, decisive action. The swift capture of the Oli Islands was a testament to their speed and amphibious versatility, allowing them to secure strategic points and gather intelligence without significant opposition. Extending their operational reach further up the Italian coast became imperative, leading to the arduous establishment of advanced bases at Maddalena, Sardinia, and Bastia, Corsica. These outposts, as one commander noted, were hewn out of proprietary resistance as much as they were out of rubble, reflecting the immense effort required to carve operational harbours from war-torn landscapes and often uncooperative local authorities. From these new vantage points, PT boats could now project their power into the crucial Gulf of Genoa. The strategic deadlock of the German Gustav Line, which had turned the Allied drive on Rome into a brick wall, necessitated the desperate gamble of the Anzio landings in January 1944. Here, PT boats took on another critical role: high-level transport and support. Between Naples and the Anzio beachhead, they became the lifeline for commanders and vital personnel. Imagine the tension on board, the constant hum of the engines, the spray of the Mediterranean, as these small craft, often moving VIPs, navigated a heavily contested supply route. Every journey was a race against time and a gamble against the unseen. German U-boats, E-boats, and lurking aircraft made the waters a gauntlet. And the crews remained on high alert, their eyes scanning the horizon, knowing that a single shell or a sudden pass from an enemy plane could turn their mission into a disaster. The stakes were always immense, the cargo often irreplaceable, and the crew's vigilance unwavering as they ferried the architects of the Italian campaign through the heart of the battle zone. As the campaign wore on, a new, more formidable German threat emerged in the Gulf of Genoa: the 10th Torpedo Boat Flotilla. These were not the flimsy F-lighters PT boats were accustomed to, but former Italian warships, peculiar, small destroyers. Faster and far more heavily armed, these TB destroyers presented a significant challenge, often surprising PT patrols with their superior firepower and speed. These encounters forced immediate tactical adjustments, pushing PT crews to rely more on their radar for early detection and to employ evasive maneuvers, highlighting their vulnerability against more robust naval adversaries. Ultimately, PT boats played a vital, multifaceted role in the Mediterranean campaign. They secured landings, screened convoys, and conducted invaluable intelligence gathering, directly contributing to Allied advances across Sicily and Italy. This period unequivocally demonstrated that PT boats were far more than just offensive torpedo platforms. Despite facing technological disadvantages, with their torpedoes and occasional limitations in speed, their adaptability for screening, transport, and intelligence missions proved crucial, underscoring their indispensable contribution to the Allied victory in this challenging theatre of war. The relentless tempo of the Mediterranean campaign, far from simplifying the PT boat's role, forced an evolution in tactics and technology. Early operations had laid bare the limitations of these nimble craft against faster, more heavily armed adversaries, chasing destroyers for hours through mounting seas, only to abandon the pursuit due to their boats' relative slowness and their radar's unreliability bred frustration. Lieutenant Commander Barnes's initial experiments with rockets, while innovative, often ended in wild confusion and terrific volume of enemy fire, their blaze of flame betraying positions on wet, tossing decks in pitch darkness. As Barnes himself noted of one such chaotic engagement, "The confusion was the only thing that saved us. It was clear a new approach was desperately needed, one that shifted from mere harassment to decisive destruction." That shift arrived with Operation Gun on March 27th. This radical concept married the PT boat's radar and scouting capabilities with the devastating firepower of heavily armed landing craft gun or LCGs. These vessels, bristling with 4.7-inch and 40mm guns, represented a formidable mobile artillery platform. The plan was audacious. PT boats would identify targets and draw fire, allowing the LCGs to hold back, unseen, their heavy guns silent. Then, once the enemy escorts were engaged, the LCGs would unleash remarkable accuracy, turning the tide from fleeting skirmishes to outright annihilation. The success of San Vincenzo, where PT boats perfectly coordinated with LCGs to decimate an entire enemy convoy, proved the destructive potential of combined arms. A wounded engineer on PT-214, Joseph Groves grit, keeping his engine running despite his injuries, as the LCGs rained fire. This wasn't just another engagement. It was a blueprint for future coordinated actions, confirming Commander Robert A. Allen, Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve's vision for destruction rather than simple harassment. Technological advancements soon followed, further bolstering PT boat capabilities. The arrival of the new Mark 13 torpedoes was a game-changer, faster, lighter, harder-hitting, and infinitely more reliable than their notoriously temperamental predecessors. Coupled with upgraded 1,500 horsepower engines that boosted top speeds by 5 knots, PT boats could now pursue and engage with greater confidence. Though teething issues persisted, one Mark 13 torpedo famously ran wild and struck PT-204 in the stern on May 18th into the 19th. The overall impact was undeniable. Successes mounted, including the sinking of 2 corvettes, on May 23rd into the 24th, a feat that prompted the German Naval Command to urgently request airstrikes on Bastia to counter the escalating threat. As the Fifth Army entered Rome on June 4th, PT boat actions continued to disrupt enemy communications, culminating in the sinking of 2 more corvettes, TA-26 and TA-30, on June 14th into the 15th. Through precise radar tracking and torpedo launches. The bravery of men like William I Fuller, torpedoman second class, who was wounded before he could fire his torpedoes on PT-307, and Lieutenant Junior Grade Paul F. Edler, United States Naval Reserve, his wounded captain who refused first aid until his crew was treated, underscore the human cost and dedication behind these victories and intelligence of the fray of Untar. The strategic imperative of controlling coastal waters, vividly demonstrated by the Elba invasion, solidified the PT boat's indispensable role in amphibious support. In mine-laden environments where larger vessels risked catastrophic loss, PTs became the eyes and ears, guiding landing craft, screening convoys, and performing vital diversionary tactics. This need for deception was nowhere more evident than at Cape Enfola during the invasion of southern France. There, PT boats roared in at midnight, laying a dense 14,000-yard-long smokescreen, while special sound apparatus blared noises to mimic a vast invasion fleet. Rockets mimicked barrages, and fake radio chatter directed an imaginary armada, successfully drawing enemy fire and confusing the enemy command. Yet, even as tactics evolved, the fundamental dangers of combat remained unpredictable and harrowing. A typical patrol could turn deadly in an instant, as Lieutenant Junior Grade Harold J. Nugent of PT-210 and Lieutenant Junior Grade James K. MacArthur of PT-209 discovered by. After successfully landing commandos near German-held beaches, Nugent spotted a large target on radar, believing it to be friendly. His blinker challenge was met not with an Allied signal, but with guttural words followed immediately by a devastating broadside from multiple 88mm and 20mm guns. The initial blast tore through PT-210's bridge, jamming the helm and knocking out controls. Yet miraculously, the crew sustained no serious wounds. Such sudden, brutal encounters underscored the constant vigilance demanded and the unexpected nature of combat. Adding to these perils, the enemy introduced new, terrifying threats. Explosive boats, small, fast craft packed with hundreds of pounds of explosives, began appearing in August 1944. Often unmanned and heading directly for Allied vessels. Soon after came human torpedoes, slow-moving, individual-operated craft designed for suicide attacks. These new threats necessitated an immediate shift in PT boat patrol strategies and tactics, demanding even greater alertness and a constant re-evaluation of tactics. Amidst this escalating danger, the integration of American radar with British torpedo capabilities proved a critical turning point, forging joint patrols that maximized effectiveness against enemy shipping, demonstrating that boats of different types could operate together with utmost efficiency provided there was teamwork. The global reach of the war soon called PT boats to another critical theatre, the English Channel. The looming invasion of Normandy, the largest amphibious assault in history, demanded an unprecedented defensive screen. Multiple PT squadrons were deployed, their mission clear. Establish the Mason Line, an inner defense against E-boat infiltration into the vast convoy unloading areas. On D-Day, June 6, 1944, as Allied forces stormed the beaches, PT boats patrolled this critical line, a constant presence amidst the chaos. While mines proved to be the greatest single menace in the Baie de la Seine, they also performed heroic rescue operations, pulling survivors from the frigid, shell-splashed waters. Commander Bulkley, who oversaw these vital operations, later reflected, "We might have had trouble with mines, with shore batteries, or with E-boats. As it was, we didn't have any trouble at all," a testament to the effectiveness of their defensive screen. From the Mediterranean sun-drenched shores to the stormy English Channel, PT boats had evolved far beyond their initial conception as mere harassing forces. They became instrumental assets, capable of complex, coordinated operations that disrupted enemy sea communications, supported massive amphibious assaults with diversionary tactics, and provided crucial direct fire support. This phase of the war definitively debunked the idea of PT boats as limited to small-scale harassment, showcasing their remarkable versatility and strategic impact across diverse and demanding theaters. The war in the Pacific, a vast and insatiable maw, now turned its gaze towards the Philippines. To secure this monumental invasion, the Allies needed close air support and, crucially, protected flanks. This strategic imperative brought the focus to islands like Morotai, a vital stepping stone whose seizure would establish an impregnable barrier against Japanese reinforcement. PT boats, already proven adaptable in the European theatre by novel achievements like sinking German floating flares in the Channel to disrupt night bombing tactics, were about to write a new chapter of daring in these far-flung emerald waters. Morotai itself quickly became a crucible for the PT squadrons. From September 16, 1944, their continuous patrols transformed the narrow 12-mile strait to Halmahera into a maritime prison. Colonel Ouchi, a Japanese garrison commander, would later concede that PTs had effectively contained an estimated 37,000 enemy troops for nearly a year, denying them passage and starving their efforts. But it was in Wazilah Bay, just across that strait, that the PT boats truly pushed the boundaries of what was considered feasible. On September 16th, a Navy fighter pilot, Ensign Harold A. Thompson, was shot down. Wounded, he parachuted into the water, his rubber raft drifting perilously close to an unmanned cargo ship, a mere 200 yards from a Japanese-occupied beach. Allied fighters strafed enemy positions. At a PBY, Catalina attempted a rescue, only to be driven off by a storm of anti-aircraft fire. The situation was desperate. Lieutenant Murray Preston in PT 489, with PT 363, volunteered for the suicidal daylight mission. As the two PT boats entered the 4-mile-wide mouth of Wasilai Bay, heavy guns erupted from both shores, their shells churning the water around the small craft. Preston, under vicious fire delivered at 150-yard range, turned eastward, deliberately crossing a suspected minefield. The torrent of incoming shells forced a temporary retreat. But the urgency of Thompson's plight was a powerful goad. With fighter planes now laying a curtain of smoke, the PTs made a second, agonizing attempt. For 20 minutes, they endured a gauntlet of continuous, increasingly accurate fire from big guns on both sides, as well as northern and southern coastal emplacements inside the bay. Lieutenants Donald F. Seaman and Charles D. Day, with complete disregard for their own life, dove into the shell-splashed water. swam to Thompson's raft and towed him back to the PT-489. As the PTs lay exposed, for those 5 critical minutes their own 40mm guns raked the beach, setting fires, and pounded the cargo ship until it too was ablaze. Then, with the rescued pilot safely aboard, they reversed course, once again braving the inferno, and withdrew. It was a mission that redefined courage, undertaken for a single life, and a testament to the PT boat's audacious spirit. The strategic importance of Leyte Gulf, however, soon eclipsed all other considerations. Admiral Halsey's recommendation to accelerate the Leyte operation, targeting an October 20, 1944, landing presented a logistical nightmare for the PT forces. Commander Bowling, the PT squadron commander, voiced his deep concerns, noting that the 1,200-mile journey from Mias Wendy was considered too far for the boats to make in one hop, and that the boat personnel would be too tired to commence combat operations efficiently. Yet the call to action was undeniable. 45 PT boats, their decks laden with extra fuel, in rubber tanks, embarked on the unprecedented self-powered transit. It was a grueling, bone-jarring odyssey. But they arrived in Leyte Gulf on October 21st, just as the first troops were landing. A significant logistical feat that proved their long-range capabilities. They were immediately plunged into the maelstrom of the Battle of Surigao Strait, a pivotal engagement that unfolded on the night of October 24 into the 25th, 1944. 39 PT boats, under Captain Bowling's intrepid leadership, were positioned as the initial scouting and attack force, staring down the overwhelming firepower of Japanese battleships and cruisers. At approximately 23:30, recounted Lieutenant Junior Grade Dwight H. Owen, off to the southwest over the horizon, we saw distant flashes of gunfire, star shells bursting, and far-off sweep of searchlights. The night was a canvas of challenging darkness, frequent rain squalls, and limited visibility. But the PT boats, though small, were undaunted by paper as father. Lieutenant Commander Robert Leeson's PT section, guarding the southern entrance, made the initial detection, their radar picking up the approaching enemy. Half an hour later, Leeson's PT-134, along with sister boats, engaged, closing to within 3,000 yards, caught in searchlight beams, shells falling all about the boat. They launched torpedoes, hearing 3 underwater explosions. Lieutenant, Junior Grade, Isidore M. Kovar's PT-137, despite a critical auxiliary generator failure that left it without radio or radar, pressed on. Closing to within 700 yards, Kovar launched a torpedo, intending it for a destroyer. Instead, it struck the Japanese light cruiser Abukuma at 0335. A loud explosion tearing through the night. Commander Kokichi Mori, Admiral Shima's staff torpedo officer, later described the devastating impact. The wireless room, which was under the bridge structure, was hit and water came in, and the crew in this room were all killed, and those above that room were suffocated by gas. She was down at the bow, reduced to about 10 knots. About 30 were killed. The remainder of the fleet went on, leaving Abukuma with no escort. The PT boats, spearheading the main attack, continued their relentless assault. As the battle raged, Lieutenant Junior Grade Herbert Stadler's PT-323 around 0630 moved in close to the damaged destroyer Asagamo. Stadler made 3 torpedo runs, firing 1 on each pass. The Asagamo sank. At 0722, in total 15 boats fired 35 torpedoes, inflicting critical damage and providing invaluable intelligence that enabled the main Allied forces to cross the T and utterly defeat the Japanese fleet. The consequences of these decisive actions were profound. In the Halmahera area, the continuous PT boat patrols had, for nearly a year, effectively contained a sizable Japanese force, disrupting their supply lines and preventing any meaningful reinforcement. In the Battle of Surigao Strait, their intelligence gathering and daring torpedo attacks set the stage for one of the most decisive naval engagements in history. As Fleet Admiral Ernest J. King reported, the enemy was first met by our PT boats, then in succession by 3 coordinated destroyer torpedo attacks, and finally by devastating gunfire from our cruisers and battleships. The enemy was utterly defeated. It was a critical turning point in the Pacific Naval War. This phase of the Pacific Campaign unequivocally debunked the idea that PT boats were merely nuisance vessels. Their long-range, self-powered transit to Leyte Gulf proved their capability for sustained operations. Their heroic rescue in Wasilla Bay, braving overwhelming fire, showcased their versatility and the extraordinary courage of their crews, and in the crucible of Surigao Strait, they were not a nuisance, but the spearhead, the eyes and ears, and the first line of attack, directly engaging significant enemy forces and laying the groundwork for a crushing victory. The Mosquito fleet had proven its sting was lethal, and its role indispensable. The Philippine archipelago, a sprawling emerald chain, now became the focal point of the Allied advance, demanding an unprecedented level of naval support. The invasion of Mindanao in December 1944 immediately plunged PT boats into a maelstrom of sustained and intense Japanese air attacks. Under Lieutenant Commander N. Burt Davis, Jr., the PT squadrons adapted with a desperate speed, transforming their agile craft into defensive fortresses, weaving through the chaos to protect the vital convoys. Even after the Mindoro airstrip became operational, on December 20th the enemy attacks persisted, a relentless, nerve-shredding gauntlet for the crews. Then came the night of December 26th, a truly terrifying prospect. A Japanese task force, a battleship, a cruiser, and 6 destroyers sighted off Mindoro, a clear threat of an amphibious landing. Allied planes were scrambling, but on the water the PT boats were the sole naval defense. Lieutenant Commander Alvin W. Fargo, Jr. positioned PTs 80 and 82 to counter any southern beach assault. Lieutenant John H. Stillman of Squadron 16, eager to engage, was ordered to hold in reserve. A frustrating but necessary constraint, given the overwhelming enemy firepower. Yet, even without a direct torpedo run, the PT boats, including Lieutenant Junior Grade Harry E. Griffin, Junior's PT 223, and Lieutenant Junior Grade E. H. Lockwood's PT 221, relentlessly tracked and harassed the superior enemy force. Their very presence, a persistent buzzing threat on the periphery, was enough to disrupt the Japanese force, and buzzings a finding that contradict a force. Preoccupied fighting off air attacks, the enemy, soon after midnight, fled northward. Their ineffective shelling of the beach, a testament to the disruption caused by the audacious Mosquito fleet. This engagement, where the small boats stared down giants, proved their ability to track, harass, and ultimately deter a vastly superior enemy. The war, however, was also evolving in insidious ways. The Japanese, facing the collapse of their naval power, introduced new terrifying threats, suicide planes and increasingly suicide boats. These small, explosive-laden craft, the marine equivalent of the kamikaze, forced PT boat crews to adapt their patrol strategies and re-evaluate tactics on the Beth. Fly. Lieutenant Robert J. Whaley, for instance, led highly successful daylight air-sea strikes into Batangas Bay, destroying numerous luggers, barges, sailing vessels, and a significant number of these suicide boats, demonstrating a new offensive strategy to preempt the threat. But the cost of this relentless warfare was immense. The loss of PT-300, split in half by a suicide plane, its stern vanishing instantly, and its bow burning for 8 agonizing hours, was a stark reminder of the sacrifices. Even more tragically, the friendly fire incident involving PT-77 and PT-79, illuminated by starshells and fired upon by their own ships, underscored the chaotic and perilous nature of combat, where danger could come from any direction, and the lives of brave men like Lieutenant Junior Grade Michael A. Hohian, Joseph E. Klesch, and Vincent Ibarra were extinguished in a devastating, avoidable error. Securing the Philippines also meant overcoming immense logistical hurdles. Establishing PT bases in the Leyte Gulf area proved to be one disappointment after another. Bourbon Point, Samar, chosen for PT Base 17, became a sea of mud during the height of the rainy season, turning hillsides into treacherous slides and flat areas into impassable morasses. The handling of spare parts in one inadequate, borrowed army warehouse was a heartbreaking job, one officer recalled. Rains, typhoons, and frequent air raids constantly interfered with the vital task of boat servicing, wearing down morale. Yet, the ingenuity of the crews and the arrival of floating equipment, dry docks, radocks, and tenders like the USS Cyrene described as a floating navy yard, became saving features, enabling operations to continue. Captain Bowling himself, chronicler of these difficulties, shifted his pennant to the Cyrene, a testament to the floating base's critical role. PT boats became instrumental in securing key waterways and harbours, facilitating Allied troop movements and supply lines. After the liberation of Corregidor, PTs moved in to clear snipers from Japanese hulks, allowing intelligence teams to board. On March 2nd, General MacArthur, in a powerful symbolic gesture, returned to Corregidor aboard PT-373, reversing his famous departure in PT-41, 3 years prior. In the southern Philippines, PT operations began from Puerto Princesa on Palawan. And for the Zamboanga invasion, PT Squadrons 8 and 24 arrived on March 9th, earning praise for their seamless cooperation. By the end of March, the relentless pressure of PT patrols had effectively dried up enemy water traffic along the Zamboanga Peninsula and through the Sulu archipelago, allowing Army landings on Basilan Island to proceed unopposed. The relentless patrols and strikes of the PT boats proved vital in disrupting enemy communication and evacuation routes, particularly in the Borneo campaign. From May to July 1945, extensive operations in the Tawi-Tawi area saw PTs, often in coordinated raids with Australian and Navy air assets, destroy or damage more than 70 surface craft in just 2 weeks in places like Sandakan Harbour, forcing the enemy to evacuate the town. In Brunei Bay, they patrolled the assault area, destroying enemy vessels and even sighting midget submarine periscopes. Though their depth charges failed, in the shallow water leading up to the Balikpapan invasion, PTs were critical in preventing the enemy from rebuilding beach obstacles and molesting navigational buoys. On a daring mission to Balabalagan Island, on July 9th into the 10th, they destroyed a reported enemy radar station, including a 130-foot tower, a costly but vital blow to Japanese communications, leaving 1 man killed and another wounded, alongside 6 fresh graves and a dead Japanese soldier found ahead of the Tarakan invasion. PT boats spearheaded shore bombardment and clearing operations, softening defences and preventing enemy repairs. Their pre-invasion patrols illuminated and strafed beaches, ensuring that Japanese obstacles could not be repaired before Allied engineer assault teams moved in. 1 PT boat sank a small anchored freighter with a 37mm hit, which burned for over 9 hours, emitting great clouds of dense black smoke that hung heavy in the humid air. PT-532, leveraging new 5-inch spin-stabilized rockets, demonstrated devastating effectiveness, sinking 1 lugger and damaging 2 others beyond repair, further crippling enemy defenses. As the Japanese military's naval and air presence diminished, in the later stages of the war, PT boats shifted from direct engagements with major surface units to crucial supporting roles. The Japanese Navy, now reduced to impotence, avoided open conflict, forcing PTs to adapt. They took on extensive blockade duties, effectively sealing off enemy-held areas. Reconnaissance missions became paramount, with PTs clearing snipers from Japanese hulks and meticulously searching for hidden enemy assets. A spectacular strike on May 14th at Piso Point, for instance, saw PTs discover 6 Japanese PT boats, tucked away under the mangroves, so cleverly camouflaged with green netting, freshly cut brush and palm leaves. They then pounded gasoline drums on the beach, igniting a fire that spread to an ammunition dump, causing a tremendous blast of flame, smoke and debris rising 300 feet in the air. A powerful example of their shore bombardment capabilities. Ultimately, the PT boats' actions in these final campaigns were overwhelming in their impact. They relentlessly disrupted Japanese supply lines, strangling enemy garrisons and preventing reinforcement. They provided indispensable support for Allied amphibious landings, from reconnaissance to direct fire support, making the impossible possible. Their anti-aircraft defense capabilities, particularly against the desperate suicide attacks, contributed significantly to destroying enemy aircraft and safeguarding larger Allied vessels. Above all, their continuous patrols and interdiction efforts effectively contained Japanese forces across vast stretches of the Pacific. This phase of the war definitively debunked the idea that PT boats were solely torpedo attack craft, highlighting their remarkable versatility in shore bombardment, anti-aircraft defense, escort duties, and reconnaissance, roles that often outweighed the damage they inflicted on the enemy and proved their indispensable contribution to victory in the Pacific. As the global conflict shuddered to a halt, in August 1945, the instruments of war, so meticulously crafted and ferociously employed, faced a swift and unceremonious end. For the hundreds of PT boats that had carved their legend across two vast oceans, the cessation of hostilities triggered an immediate, almost brutal decommission. Rows of them, once sleek predators, now lay battle-worn and weary, their hulls scarred by shrapnel and salt, their engines silent. On beaches like Samar, in the Western Pacific, they were systematically stripped of armament and vital equipment. Their once proud forms reduced to skeletal frames, awaiting destruction or disposal, the light wooden construction that had granted them their speed and agility in combat now condemned them. Unlike steel-hulled warships, they were unsuitable for long-term storage. Their frames broken, their timbers ravaged by worms, dry rot, and the relentless toll of war. This wasn't a gradual fade, but a rapid, strategic pivot. An economic imperative to demilitarize surplus naval assets. Many late-war squadrons like Squadrons 39 and 40, commissioned in early 1945, arrived in the Philippines only to find the fighting over. Their boats often reassigned under Lend-Lease to the Soviet Union and Britain, never to see direct enemy action under the American flag. The roar of their Packard engines, once synonymous with daring strikes, was replaced by the silence of obsolescence. Yet, even as the majority of the Mosquito fleet was swiftly dismantled, a crucial, if temporary, post-war utility emerged. The very qualities that made PT boats effective in combat, speed, shallow draft, and reach, made them invaluable in the immediate aftermath of victory. They became vessels of peace, facilitating surrenders and undertaking humanitarian evacuations. On Morotai, PTs carried United States Army personnel and Japanese surrender commissions to isolated outposts, accepting the capitulation of 37,000 troops and 4,000 civilians in Kuching, Borneo. A deeply poignant mission unfolded. As PT boats working alongside the USS Willoughby transferred hundreds of internees, including women and children, and Allied prisoners of war, among them survivors of the USS Houston. From captivity to freedom, as these small boats navigated rivers lined with cheering natives and scattered Japanese troops, they became symbolic bridges from the horrors of war to the promise of peace. By early 1946, the Navy Department had made its decision. The era of the wartime PT boat was over. Squadrons 41 and 42, barely formed, were decommissioned by February, and Squadron 4, a training unit, followed in April. Only a handful of vessels, PTs 613, 616, 619 and 620, were retained, transferred to the Operational Development Force, not for active service, but for experimental work. This marked a profound transition, as the Navy, having learned invaluable lessons from the PT boat's wartime performance, immediately authorized entirely new designs. This was not an abandonment of the concept, but a strategic leap forward. Designers embraced advanced materials, envisioning aluminum hulls that promised unprecedented agility and resilience, more powerful Packard engines, and experimental propulsion systems, including gas turbines, were integrated, pushing speeds in excess of 40 knots. Experimental vessels like PT-809, with its riveted hull inspired by airframe construction, and PT-812, a 105-foot all-welded hull designed for high-speed rough sea performance, laid the groundwork for a new generation of fast attack craft, the first of which were accepted in 1951. Within a year of the war's end, the iconic wartime PT boat had all but vanished from active naval service. Its rapid decommissioning, however, was far from a dismissal of its legacy. Instead, it underscored a strategic decision for relentless innovation, directly informed by the crucible of combat experience. The critical operational and material lessons gleaned from the daring actions of the Mosquito fleet, its adaptability, Its vulnerabilities and its immense potential were meticulously preserved. They became the bedrock upon which the Navy continued its never-ending quest to maintain versatile and effective seagoing forces. The PT boat, though physically gone, left an indelible blueprint, proving that the spirit of audacious, swift attack and vital support would forever shape the future of naval warfare. Its story, therefore, is not merely one of a weapon discarded, but of a catalyst for the next chapter of naval power.